All right, that was just the other day. Clark County authorities charged Keefe D one count of murder. Jamahl, I want you to break down how is this possible, even though Keefe D had a proffer agreement with LA and federal authorities several years ago when he admitted to the shooting.
Man, just first of all, seeing that picture of Tupac is still, after all these years, is just so eerie to see that look on his face. It's still tough to look at all these years later. But to answer that question, this is a different state, right? So we're in Nevada, and I don't think that they would necessarily be bound by, by a proffer in California. That's definitely a legal issue to look into. But ultimately, the reason it appears at this point why they didn't pursue on the information that he provided was because it was, a limited non-prosecution agreement. So they would not be able to use his confession against him. But then what ends up happening is if you are making a number of statements independent of that agreement, right? So he's done Vlad TV, all these different, media outlets telling his story and the book, right? So if you're making all these statements independent of that statement that you gave, that's where they're able to do this. And it is a little suspect why it's happening this long later. But detectives can come back and look at files and say, hey man, I've been seeing this dude giving all these interviews and making statements, and say, hey man, let's open this thing back up. I mean, and that happens pretty often. I mean, we don't hear about it because celebrities are not involved, but detectives will dig up cold cases all the time and see if they can look at it from a different angle, and try and move forward with it. And so when we saw, in July, when they went ahead and executed that search warrant, it was like, okay, man, it's on. And then we hear about, okay, now it's going in front of a grand jury. And then now we hear, obviously, charges proceeding.
Yeah, the investigators in Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada, said that they reopened this case in 2018. They didn't really say why in 2018, but in 2018, it's when Keefe D gave an interview for BET called Death Row Chronicles. And in that documentary for BET is when he first admits to participating in the homicide outside of that proffer agreement. So even though he's protected by that same admission in the proffer agreement, just because if you repeat it somewhere else, you're not under that protection.
Exactly.
So if we do the timeline on this, 2018, that's the Death Row Chronicles interview for BET. And then the following year in 2019, he publishes his book. And I think that kind of put the nail in the coffin for him. Is the I know you mentioned the Vlad TV interview, but that the Vlad TV interview came after the book.
Right.
The Death Row Chronicles was 2018, then the book was 2019, and a lot of people ask me, but how can what you write in a book be used against you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, anything you say, anything that you publish, anything that comes out on your behalf can ultimately be used against you. So whether you're sitting down for an interview, whether you're writing letters. Now, if it's a writing, right, in a book or a letter or something like that, then it is going to be a little different from you being on tape saying something, and still, there's going to be some scrutiny in that. But at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, Compton Street Legend was a book, is an autobiography. He's talking about these things. So these are words from him, and obviously all the media that he was doing was in promotion of this book. So there's no ambiguity as to whether, and he wasn't. This wasn't like a joke. He wasn't presenting this as a parody or anything like that. Like, nah, this was actual fact. At least that's how he was representing it. And so, yeah, those statements can certainly be used against him, and that's why they don't even really need the information from the proffer, even though they've been sitting on this information all these years. in terms of how this thing went down.
Now, I read the book that Keefe published, and I was actually asked to write an intro to the book. So they sent me an advanced copy, and I read the book. But when he starts writing about the part where they shoot Tupac, he actually, for the first time ever, says that Tupac pulled the gun out first. So I was thinking to myself, is this guy anticipating that perhaps this book can get him indicted, but now he has a self-defense argument to claim? But he had never in 20 something years, he didn't tell Greg Kading that of the LAPD. That was never part of the proffer when he was told to tell all the truth. He never said anything about Tupac having a gun. The first time we hear about it is in this book. What's the chances of him trying to use self-defense? Or, well, we know the chances are 100%, but what's the chances of it even working now that he just wrote in the book, Tupac pulled a gun out? Because if they're going to use the book against him, don't they have to consider everything he wrote in the book?
Well, I mean, even if they didn't want to consider everything, he's going to take the stand, right? Because you can't assert self-defense without taking the stand. So if he were to go to trial, then he would presumably say that hey, they pulled out first and then we did what we did. I think the credibility of such a statement ends up getting attacked if you did not say that in your proffer. And one thing, and I'm sure they say, hey, if you lie about anything, this deal is off the table. And so there's a lot of pressure there, because it's my understanding there was a lot of weight being moved around, and he was facing life based on this, drug case that they had built up against him. And that's what led to this proffer session. So his attorney would have definitely emphasized to him, and the prosecutor and the whatever agents were there would have definitely emphasized to him. And they sit up and they nitpick through every little detail that you give them. So, and they say, hey, they tell you, hey, what you're saying, we're going to investigate it. And if you're lying about any of this stuff, then, it's going to come back to you. And I know that they did actually end up speaking to Orlando Anderson, and then, he obviously got shot and killed. But they were going to do everything that they could to make sure that everything checked out. So if he didn't mention it there, then it's pretty safe to say, and again, that, you're signing off that everything that you're saying is true and correct, to the best of your knowledge. So obviously that's a big thing to leave out in a proffer session if, Tupac or Suge or had pulled out first. So, that's probably not going to be very, very credible. But I mean, if that's your only play, then, you got to do what you can. And maybe somebody might believe, because at the end of the day, the prosecutor would end up having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was not acting in self-defense. So, you never know what a jury's going to do. So, hey, you got to try what you got to try.